Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Laura Gabbert and LA Times food critic Jonathan Gold from the film City of Gold, moderated by Landmark Theater's Dan Gorski, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
Let's start with you, Laura, and just talk a little bit about how this got started, because this is a very interesting part of LA that we're getting to look inside, deep inside. How did this idea come to you, and how did you approach Jonathan to get it started?
I think it was it sort of came to be over a number of years. I moved to Los Angeles in the mid-'90s and had lived in a lot of other cities, more sort of centralized cities, and was reluctant to move here. I moved here to go to graduate school, so I didn't have a choice. And a couple years after living here, I started reading Jonathan's column, and I credit his writing with really changing the way I sort of experienced Los Angeles and the way I just sort of experience the city on a day-to-day basis. You know, the way I kind of thought about, I'd been used to living in a city like New York City, where you walk out the door and you're kind of confronted by the city, and you don't have to really work for any kind of sort of experience. And I learned through reading Jonathan that you had to sort of seek out experiences, and it's the process of seeking them out that makes you sort of appreciate the city. So that was sort of the kernel of the idea, or the kernel of the appreciation for him. And then years later, our kids ended up at the same school, and I bid on a silent auction item at our school fundraising event for a dinner with the Critic.
The old-fashioned way.
Yeah. And then hounded him for months.
What was that like for you, Jonathan? I mean, did you ever think that maybe someday this could be a topic of a film, or
No, not at all. I mean, I'd been approached to do stuff a lot before, mostly reality TV, I guess. I mean, judging things. I'm sure that the 9 days of filming Cupcake Wars would have been great. But I never had, there's always the American tradition of the anonymous restaurant critic. But I wasn't all that anonymous anyway. I mean, I'd done panels and I'd given speeches, and I was sort of civically involved.
And won the Pulitzer.
Yeah, my picture was out a lot after that. And, there was that experience of, just having, just being Instagrammed before I'd finished my first cocktail. And, I don't know, I really liked Laura. I thought her first documentary, Sunset Stories, was really swell. And if anybody was going to do it, it was going to be her. Plus, when you see somebody in the drop-off line every day, it's like it's different from like turning somebody down by email.
Well, one thing that really comes across in this movie is your empathy, and they talk about that. It's sort of you're rooting for them as you're going along, and it's kind of different from what, at least my perception was always, of the angry food critic, that nothing's good enough, but you're on their side, and I just wonder if part of that is just you're enjoying the food more because you're open to discovery. Do you think that there's that there's something to being open to discovery that makes the food more enjoyable?
I'm not sure that it's being open to discovery, but I do tend to be pretty sympathetic, and it's a little different at the times. But I figured back when I was writing at the LA Weekly, that if a restaurant did one thing better than anybody else in Los Angeles, that it was good enough for the readers to know about. And how could you not be joyous when somebody is devoting that much of his or her life and opening a restaurant that's just provides you with a wonderful experience that you can't get anywhere else? I mean, you taste like the Dorowat that Gannett makes, and it's just absolutely mind-blowing. And there was a time in the 90s where Ruth Reich was the main critic for the LA Times, and I was sort of writing what I do. And she'd be out exploring, the 14th best Italian restaurant in Brentwood, and I'd be like, finding a restaurant that served not just a dish but an entire cuisine I hadn't known about until the previous day. And I always thought that I had the best end of that particular bargain.
So it seems like some of the fun is not just the flavors, but the discovering of the actual new dishes and the way that they put the flavors together. And would you say that there's something more special when you discover a new dish, that you're like, this is kind of like more than just finding the best version of something?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mean discovering it as in like a Columbus way, right? I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's like, if there's a Chinese dish that I've had that is new to me and has been cooked in basically the same form for 1,600 years, I have not discovered it. But I think one of the things I try to do in my writing, in my columns, is that I never take a position of, I never claim to be an expert in anything. If I'm eating a bowl of pho and I judge it to be better than the 180 other versions of pho that I've had, I can say that. But somebody that grew up when his grandmother made it as a special thing for the family on Sunday afternoons has an experience with that dish that's completely different than the one that I have. I like to think that part of what I'm writing about is the process of discovery, of going to a part of town you don't know and going to a restaurant you haven't heard of and confronting a menu that you haven't understood and coming over a series of visits to understand it and coming to just taste something that you've never really had quite that way before. It's stunning. It's something that anybody with $12 in their pocket can do.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe a moment that kind of really surprised you in filming this? Was there something that you kind of thought, well, I kind of know how this is going, kind of how the story's going to go, and was there anything that you what was the biggest moment of surprise for you?
I mean, I can't single out a moment because we shot for so long. We shot for 5 years. But
how much footage did you capture?
in terms of gigabytes, not footage. I mean,
Okay.
about like
Hours, many hours?
Over 100 hours, certainly.
And 50 or 60 restaurants at least.
Yeah, many restaurants. So, but I think that I think the thing that I didn't expect to be part of the documentary, this is like the wonderful thing about making a documentary, is that you start out with an idea, and then you get to know your subject and you get to know that world a little bit, and then you sort of discover all these other things that you then weave into the film. And one of the things that I was really struck by after a year or so spending time with Jonathan is just the rigor he brings to his work and the sort of attention to detail and all the research and all the time and the care and kind of knowledge he brings to every review. And I don't think people know that when they pick up the LA Times and read his column. They just read it and it's like, oh, he went there and he wrote about it. And so that was really, it didn't really surprise me, because if I had then thought about it, I'd be like, well, of course that's what he does. But it was just interesting to really sort of understand that he brings that much time and attention to every piece. And so then that got us thinking about, okay, how do we show his process a little bit in the film? And then that kind of led us to, so what does a critic do, and what's the role of the critic in society? And so we touch on that in the film, but I didn't know we would do that, starting out.
And this is probably the point where I should mention that there were a bunch of ground rules going out, but the most important one was that she not be allowed to film me actually in the process of reviewing a restaurant. Because there's no way to go, anonymous or not, there's no way to go into a restaurant with a camera crew and eat the food and have any kind of accurate idea of what's going on there. I mean, my first responsibility is always to the reader, so I thank you for seeing the movie. It's kind of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, right? You can either show the action of it, or it can be done properly, but both can't happen simultaneously.
Well, that's another thing that I found really interesting is that you would try a place many times before you actually. It's like you were getting to know the place really well. Is that kind of how you always did it, or was that a process that you developed over time?
No, I've always done that. I mean, I've had the luxury of always working for publications that did that. Even when I was writing in the 80s at the LA Weekly. I mean, I went a lot of times. When I wrote the Times in the 90s, I did. Sometimes when I was writing for Gourmet in the early aughts, I mean, sometimes I would go to high-end restaurants 10 or 12 times. But because it's not like a movie, it's not. You see a movie today, and you see it tomorrow. It's the same movie. You see a play, it's pretty much the same play. But a restaurant becomes something completely different from one day to the next. It's almost more like a living organism than it is like an artifact that can be studied as if it were under glass.
Talk about what you got the Pulitzer specifically awarded for, and where were you when you learned about it?
The Pulitzer in criticism is for it could be for one work or it can be for a collection. So it was 10 columns, which included, a review of Cut when it first opened. It included a review of Laurent Canu restaurant and a meditation on fire cooking, and the thing that almost everybody caught on first was a review of a restaurant that I noted for something known as the porno burrito. So yes, you can take it from me. You can win a Pulitzer Prize for writing about the porno burrito. And I was totally shocked, right? I worked for an alt weekly, and people from alt weeklies don't win them, or not very rarely. And nobody had ever won it for writing about food before. So it was completely from left field. I think I found out when somebody from KPCC called, and her first question was, "How did you win a Pulitzer Prize?"
Oh, yeah. How do you select items on a menu? What's your process?
I kind of have everything. I mean, not all at once, but I mean, I'll. There are actually some scenes in the movie, like the one at Antojitos Carmen that was filmed early on, when I'm shown at the table with, 14 plates of food in front of me. And it must be said, I was also ordering for the crew.
He was. That's totally fair. He was.
But I mean, I'll order like normal amounts of things, but I go back 4 or 5 times, and I may not get every single thing on the item, but I'll get a bunch of it. I mean, the first time through, I'll obviously try to figure out what a chef is specializing in, where the dishes that seem to be regional, and always the weird stuff. I mean, there's a lot of restaurant critics have a theory about critic bait, food that doesn't necessarily exist to be eaten, but it definitely exists to be reviewed.
Yeah, talk about how the film is a love song to Los Angeles. Did you kind of have that idea from the start?
I mean, it's what I was hoping for. I mean, I think she was thinking of more a standard biopic at the beginning, and I told her flat out, I did not intend to, break up with my wife to give her a narrative arc. I wasn't going to get arrested, and I wasn't going to do anything like that would have made interesting plot. So, and plus, a writer's life is boring, right? We sit down and we type, and then we stare off into space. We type some more, and then we go out for coffee, and then we come back and we type, or we don't type, as the case might be. But the idea of looking at Los Angeles in the way that I look at Los Angeles was something that I hoped would happen. And one of the things that surprised me the most in seeing, when I finally saw a rough cut of the film, is just how much time there is of, behind the wheel of my truck. That maybe people, see the movie in, Australia or New York, and they look at like that, beautiful scene of sitting on the, Harbor Freeway at rush hour, not moving, with the sun setting behind the San Gabriels as being intolerable. But you live here. There's that sort of Zen that happens. that if you're going to go from Santa Monica to Pasadena at rush hour, it's going to take an hour and a half. You have some excellent tunes in your car, and it's the only time you have to yourself. It's the glorious the glorious ecstasy of movement, or of non-movement.
Oh yes, what would your death row meal be?
Did I mention a death row meal?
Someone talked about it.
When you're talking to Mark, you talk about it.
Yeah. The
Jell-O and
the Jell-O and the cream wafer sticks and the or my dad's particular way with salad, where he'd cut a head of iceberg lettuce in half. One half would get wishbone Italian dressing. The other would get wishbone Caesar dressing. Then he'd open a package of pre-shredded cheese. I did not grow up in a gourmet household. I don't know. The idea of a death row meal is always, depressing, right? You overeat and then you die. But I've something about what I've been talking about tonight makes me sort of yearn for the potato tacos at El Atacor number 11 in Highland Park. So that sounds good. They come 10 to a box, and believe me, there are no leftovers.
What is going to happen in the city of Los Angeles in the next 5 years, in your opinion?
There are three things that are going on now. I'm not sure how much they're covered in the film, but one is the growing. Is trend the wrong word? I mean, maybe trend, but the growing appreciation of vegetable-centered cuisine. Not necessarily. I mean, definitely not vegan and not even vegetarian. But
to be clear.
but but the realization that if you're careful and a good cook, you can be really interesting with a parsnip. and that maybe there'll be a little bit of pancetta in there or something for flavor, or dried anchovies or fish sauce, but that the sort of the ratio we're no longer the era of big meat, little vegetable. It's the other way around. The second one would be the sort of brilliant, I guess, second generation cuisine that we're seeing. People who grew up in LA as children of immigrants, definitely within an immigrant food traditions, maybe and actually often their parents own restaurants, who have gone to culinary school and gone to work with some of the greatest chefs in France and in New York, and come back with all their knowledge and their sort of deep appreciation for a certain kind of ingredient, a certain way of looking at the earth, and they're, instead of working in hotel restaurants or regimented kitchens, they're opening places and reinterpreting the flavors that they grew up on. And some of the places that are doing that well. Like, I mean, in this part of town, Casilla, obviously, and Lukshan in Culver City, Taco Maria in Costa Mesa, the Gorilla Taco Truck that was in this. The food's absolutely brilliant, and it speaks to California in a way that I don't think anything ever has before.
Okay, so eating for work versus leisure. Is it different for you?
Absolutely no difference. I mean, it's not LA, but there was a when I was living in New York and I was working at Gourmet 15 years ago, and my wife Lori somehow just got sick of the food thing. She was the executive editor at Gourmet at the time, and so she booked us a trip to the Big Island, where she was theorizing there would be no food at all. Mm. And of course, I spent the entire 2 weeks driving 70 miles at a time for a slightly better Loco Moco in Hilo from the fancy hotel on the Kona coast, and finding people who had luau's on the volcano, and going and watching people harvest taro, and it wasn't a non-food vacation. I can't stop doing it.
What did you have for dinner tonight?
I had some reheated turmeric fried rice from Jetlada. It was really good. I have an interesting story about that turmeric fried rice. I got takeout from there yesterday, and they do this special kind of fried rice that's just incredibly spicy. And this morning I was waking up by just the screaming from downstairs. Apparently my son Leon had been going through the leftovers in the refrigerator, figured the fried rice would make a good breakfast, and oops. Oddly enough, he did want me to pack him some for lunch, so.
Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight and for speaking to us, and thank you for reminding us all what a beautiful city Los Angeles is.
Thanks, it's been wonderful. And thanks for coming out tonight.
Thank you.
I appreciate it so much.